Welcome to the Learning Guild. In today's webinar, we have Shannon Tipton, who will be speaking on curating content with meaning and impact. I'm Karen Gleason, your session host. As owner of the Learning Rebels, Shannon Tipton is a skilled learning strategist with over 20 years of leadership experience developing successful infrastructures for training departments across North America and Europe. Shannon is excited to work with organizations to develop learning solutions to achieve applicable business results. Recognized as bringing real-world expertise into the learning field, Shannon integrates learning technologies to strengthen workplace alignment, enhance collaboration, and increase learning connectivity. As author of Disruptive Learning, Shannon frequently speaks at conferences across North America and Europe. Recently named in the top 100 e-learning movers and shakers by e-learning industry, Shannon's blog, Learning Rebels, is in the top 100 e-learning blogs and can be found at learningrebels.com. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Shannon.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Let's get my screen here together. All right, well, welcome everybody. We are here talking about curating with meaning and impact, moving beyond aggregation to quality sharing. And so I hope that you are as excited about this topic as I am. Now, when it comes to curation, one of the things that we've always said is that curation should be part and parcel of what we do, especially today when we think about the resources that are at the tips of our hands. And so speaking of curation, here is all of my information. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the places. I like to say that if you can't find me, there are the zombie apocalypse is finally hit, because there are certainly bigger issues. Also on your screen here, you see a QR code that will sign you up for the Learning Rebels newsletter, which connects you to our Learning Rebels coffee chat, where we talk about topics like curation and other things that are important to L&D right now in the moment. So why don't we go ahead and get this conversation flowing? So what if the content you shared with your people helped them to be smarter, better, faster? What if people had access to expertise at their fingertips? What if the focus shifted from, look, here's something interesting, to, look, here's something incredibly useful? What if the business saw L&D for what it is, problem solvers, growing efficiencies, and helping people to get unstuck? What if we focused on curating content that helped people be smarter, better, faster, moving from content aggregation to curation and understanding the what, the why, and the how? So are you strong with the curation force? So we're popping up a poll here for you, and I'm curious as to where you feel you stand with your curation skills. So how strong are your curation skills? Does knowing how to use Google count? You regularly bookmark items, but then promptly forget about them? You use both an aggregation and a bookmark tool, but never check the results? Your aggregated content is organized and the content itself is easy to find, but you often forget to share the results. You regularly find and share relevant content to your team and network, or maybe there's another way that you feel about your content curation skills, so you can select other, but put it in the chat to let me know. So how do you feel your curation skills level up? So let's see where you stand.
All right, we have about 75% of the people. So if you do choose other, please type that in chat so we know. Still see some things coming in.
Yep, I see Kathleen here. I occasionally find and share. Okay. So it's not a regular thing, it's an occasional thing. So it's not quite in your diary to do that. All right.
All right, looks like most people have finished, and there's the results.
Okay. Cindy, definitely find and share all the time. Good for you, Cindy. And Enid, difference between curating for personal versus for clients. So there is a difference there. I do share content with my team, but I don't get much feedback or discussion. Oh, that's a good observation, Elaine. I share across multiple platforms, but can't figure out how to aggregate what I'm sharing in one place. That's a common question that we have. So let's see here what our poll says. You regularly book, the majority of you here, 33%, I regularly bookmark, but promptly forget. And I have to admit that I used to be in that space. You know, you have your favorites, right? So for those of you who use Chrome, you might star the favorites, and then it's like, oh, I forget about it, right? And now Chrome actually has that add to reading list function that's part of your tabs. And so it's easy to get that list built up and then forget about it, right? So it's easy to set it and forget it, right? Aggregation tools, Digo and Evernote, absolutely. Multiple computers and devices is a challenge. Sure, if they are not linked up, absolutely. So if you have a work computer and a personal computer, those two things don't necessarily talk to each other, and it's harder to link that up, right? And yeah, and Evernote is all the rage. So, I mean, I love me some Evernote for sure, okay? Milanote, and we're gonna talk tools here also. And pretty much what you guys are talking about is content aggregation. Okay, not necessarily content curation. We're going to talk about the difference here in a little bit. And I see here from Mark, does Teams Wiki count as an aggregation tool? Sure, anything that collects information is going to count as an aggregation tool. And well, most importantly, if it aggregates automatically, which is really what you want. So bookmarking is more of a manual thing, right? So if you've got a Digo extension, for example, on your toolbar, and so you manually mark things, as bookmarking. Aggregation collects it for you and helps you disseminate it. But let's get into, before we start getting into the shiny things, which are tools, let's talk about curation in of itself. So curation in of itself here is, when we think about curation, we think about the ability to aggregate information, but also to send information out. So now what I'd like you to do here is we're going to play a little bit with menteemeter. So let me see in the chat real quick. How many of you are familiar with menteemeter? Just give me a yes or no in the chat. I see a variety here between yeses and nos flying in. All right, so let me get it up here for you. Okay. Oh, actually, I don't want that one. There we go. I want this one. So at the top of the screen, does everybody see my Mentee screen here? Hopefully you do. At the top of the screen, you see where you can go either on your mobile device, or you can open up another tab in your computer. It's up to you. You're going to go to mentee, MENTI.com, and use the code 41511692. And tell me, what does good content curation mean to you? So let me rephrase that then. So how do you know that the content that you're sending out is good content? Or how do you know that content you're receiving is good content? What makes for good content? Picking things that learner will actually use and benefit from. Good one. Content that is relevant and timely, also good. The code 41511692, you see it at the top of the screen. Useful information to share with others. Peer-reviewed, feedback from stakeholders. Oh, I like that. Relevant, useful in their workflow, even better. Something meaningful. If it's relevant, if it's easy to comprehend. meets the audience needs, easy to comprehend and not too complex. It answers a question. Oh, I like that. It answers a question. It's helpful, right? Relevant, engaging, easy to read. It's applicable to your audience. Yes, all of these things make for really good content creation. So now when we think about actually curating, we're aggregating content, we're bringing content to us in some way, whether that's through bookmarking or through a specific tool like what some of you have already mentioned. Then it's about sharing. Curation is about gathering and sharing. If we just gather, we're just content hoarders at that point, right? So we don't want to be content hoarders. We want to be curators. And that means what we want to do is we want to tell the story behind the content. So when you think about curation, a lot of times what pops into people's minds is the image of a museum curator, right? And I see all sorts of good things here happening on the screen. I love this. So you think about museum curation and oh, and also preservation. Thank you for that. It's all about what story are we trying to tell? And so with your curation efforts, the information that you send out to your users, to your audience, it's all about what story is that content trying to tell? How is it being helpful? How is it relevant? Right? So it's not just a matter of gathering a piece of information and then sending it out to the masses. It is then about why. What's the why behind the content? Right? And that is what good curation is. Good curation helps people understand the why. So I love all of these ideas that are coming through. Relevant seems to be the big flow, right information at the right time. It meets objectives. It's SMART, right? The acronym SMART. It's content that will be used, right? It is easy to access for others. So this is all really great information here. Okay, and let me get here. Let me get back to my screen. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Get back to my screen here. Here we go. All right. So now that we've sort of set the stage for what is curation, we can then move forward. And now one of the pieces of information, one of your pieces of information here that Karen is going to upload for you or has made available for you is a curation tool.
And Shannon, I'm going to interrupt you because we're seeing your presenter view, not your presentation view.
Sorry about that, folks.
I know we want to give everyone a sneak peek, but
there we go.
There we go. Thank you so much. And that tool that Shannon is mentioning will be posted after the webinar.
Yes. Oh, okay. So there is, so you will be getting a curation tool, and it's a worksheet that's going to help you plan your curation appropriately. So how do we go about doing that? So let's work through this together. So here it is. Here's the key. Finding information is not the issue today. Filtering information is. We all know that we can go out into the Google machine and we can find 2 billion pieces of information about instructional design, right? We can find 3 billion pieces on leadership development. That's all great, but now how do we filter? How do we make sure what we are actually accessing is good for our audience? How do we then make sure that what we're sending is relevant based on everything that you put into the Mentee, right? How do we know it's relevant? How do we know it's helpful? How do we know it's useful? And that is the bigger question that your people have. So this is the key difference here between aggregation and curation. Those two things should not be confused. So now that we know really these key differences, it's about then moving forward and understanding that good curation for your people means sharing those how-tos, it's giving them those expert advice, it's giving them user-generated content, perhaps by them. So are you curating information that comes from within your organization? If so, how are you finding user generation that you can curate out to the wider audience? So for example, you've got your sales team, and your sales team is finding really great pieces for how to negotiate better, or how to build a proposal, or how to handle objections. Where are they finding this information? Do you have access to this information? How can you pull it together in an organized fashion and send it out to them, right? So, do we know good content when we see it? How do you know that the content that you're going to send out to your people is good? Put that into the chat for me. How do you know good content when you see it? Okay, it's from a reliable source. It's data-based. It answers the question. Oh, it relies on upvoting. Oh, that's a good one. That's true. Okay. Recommended by people you respect. It makes sense. It's clear. It's concise, right? So these are all things that are important to you. So you know that they're going to be important to your people. So remember this statistic. Those of you who are familiar with the Bernsen by Deloitte, the Modern Learner graphic, one of the things that it tells us is people spend 41% of the time just trying to find stuff. 41% of their time trying to find stuff. So what does that say about your curation efforts? So if your people are spending 41% of their time just trying to find stuff, what does that mean? How can you be helpful? Yeah, it means it's important, right? It's very important. Yeah, you did. Our car, I see you there. You did not create an easy button, right? I love that. So you didn't create an easy button for your curation efforts. People can't find stuff. So when you think about your curation efforts, it's incredibly important to the people around you. It's incredibly important to the people who need help at the moment they need help, right? So that means then a highly focused effort on our curation skills becomes higher in the level of priority skills. If people are spending 41% of their time just trying to find stuff, they need your help. They need your help to help them organize. They need your help perhaps to even find information for them so they don't have to spend all of their time curating things, right? Yeah, and we can, it does provide maps. So if you're a good curator, you're providing a map to information. I love that, Laura. That's absolutely handy and correct. Yes. Too much information available and not filtered easily. Yes, yes, and yes. Does this relate to shared taxonomies and naming conventions? Absolutely. So we're not going to talk about naming conventions here on this webinar, but it is an important thing to keep in mind. So when you are curating content, how are you naming it? What are the tags? What are the keywords? What are the naming conventions that you have? So those are all things to keep into consideration when you're thinking about content that you are trying to share. And so this is why curation then becomes an important skill. It becomes important because it gives your people faster access to relevant information. It supports self-directed learning. So when you organize content for them, it's not so difficult for your people to go out and find information and learn from that information, right? So if you go into a museum and you're handed a handy map of where to find the exhibit, your favorite exhibit, you know where to find it, or you know where to find something that may be new, right? And so you have this handy map, and that encourages me to go out and explore more, right? So when you put your curations together, efforts together in an organized effort, this is what happens. It encourages collaboration and communication. It encourages a growth mindset. And most importantly, it encourages a level of learning curiosity that will extend itself outward to your organization. And so when we talk about making content effective or helpful, we've already answered this when we did the Mentee. We know that content becomes effective and helpful when it's relevant, when it is useful. And so this is where you need to keep your mind's eye when you think about content that you're sending out to your people. Okay, so now, how do we then develop our curation skills? Well, there's 3 parts to curation: assessing potential, making a content decision, and then planning your communication. So those 3 ways, those 3 parts rather, are all part of your curation efforts. And so the tool that you're going to get breaks these 3 parts down for you. So let's discuss part number 1 here, assessing potential. So you have set up an aggregated format for gathering your information. And let's say you use a tool like Feedly. And so you have all of this information coming into your Feedly stream. And now you want to send out pieces of curated content. So the first part that you want to consider is, what problem is it that you are trying to solve? The next part of this is assessing your audience. Tell me, why is assessing the audience important? In the chat, share with me, why is assessing the audience important for your curation skills? Well, yeah, because it's for them. Thank you, Casey. So you're on target with their needs and interests. What's their need? You have to know who you are talking to. That's an important one. Thank you for that. And the name whizzed by me before I could catch it, but that's an important one. You have to know who you are talking to. Making sure the language is appropriate, and you want to be able to gauge relevance. Right? Different skill levels require different information. Thank you, Eugene. Every audience learns differently. And Savita, that's accurate. In this case, what we want to think about is, who is the end user from a perspective of skill and role? So if you are going to curate information, again, let's go back to our sales team. We're going to curate information for our sales team. How to negotiate. Now, how to negotiate, it might be easy to say that we're going to send that piece of information out to everyone. But is that piece of information relevant for everyone? Oh, Karen, I like that. You need to think about your learner personas. So if you don't have learner personas, if you do have learner personas, this becomes an easier exercise, right? And this is not a webinar about learner personas. That's something else that could be discussed. But in this case, having a learner persona makes it easy. So when you think about, again, if I go back to that negotiation skills, let's say we've curated several pieces of information about negotiation skills. Do we send that piece of information out to everyone on the sales team at the same time? Enid, yes, I see that. New salesperson versus experienced. You need, right, or those that are only negotiating. Very good catch, Guy. Not all of your sales team may be negotiating sales, right? They might have different roles within the sales team. So it doesn't make sense to send out one piece of content for everyone. Just as one size fits all training does not fit everyone, one size curation does not fit everyone either. And what will happen if I'm a member of the sales team and every time you send something out, I open it, I look at it, and I see nothing that applies to me? After 3 or 4 emails like that, what happens? Yeah, you stop paying attention, you stop looking, you ignore the emails, right? So then your curation efforts go out to essentially no one, because no one is looking at them because they don't find them relevant anymore. And this is why assessing the audience becomes super critical to what you are doing. So now, once you've assessed your audience, it really then does become about what problem is it that you're trying to solve. So you guys tell me in the chat, what are some common reasons we might be curating information? Or for you, what are some of the common reasons you are curating information for your organizations? What are some of the topics? Delegating, compliance, feedback, leadership skills. Okay, leadership. I'm going to write that down real quick so I don't forget. And I saw soft skills, disciplinary knowledge gaps, to address knowledge gaps, I assume. Coaching, digital competencies. I like it. Okay, so those are all situational coaching. Procedure changes, yeah. So those are problems. Some of those are larger problems. So when you think about soft skills or leadership development or even coaching, right? Or addressing a knowledge gap, those are very, very broad. So have you ever found yourself in a position where you are sending leadership articles out to everyone? Does that happen? Let's be honest with ourselves. Do we send out leadership articles to everyone? Yeah. Sometimes, some of you are no, some of you are yes. And the key with questions like this is if we're honest with ourselves. I've done it. I know I've done it. I'm sure you've done it too. So the point is to think about it before we actually do it and think about what problem was this article supposed to solve? And is the audience that I sent it to the right audience? Then the next part of it is, what should people be able to do with that information? So if you think about sending out a leadership-based article, so let's just say on emotional intelligence. So you found an article that has 10 best emotional intelligence tips. All right, so you send that out to everybody. What should people be able to do with it? They should be able to connect to it and implement it. Implement it how? Apply the learning how? Easy application, how? Yeah, listicles don't generally give you the how, but what's your role in that, Tamara? Apply to different scenarios. Try using one tip. Somebody, I just saw that whiz by. We just sent out a 10 tips article, right? Self-reflect, look for ways to apply, have a call to action. Sending out curated information and not putting a call to action is like saying, here, when you feel like it, take advantage of this. You want people to actually think and apply, but most importantly, you want to give them some direction as to how that is supposed to work in their day-to-day, right? So without giving them the how, without giving them the what, then it's something that just sits in their email and they'll go, well, I'll think about that later. So you want them to be able to actually take action, right? That's the point of curating information, is for people to be able to take action. And then it's about how will you share? And I saw some of you talking about this earlier about, well, how do you share? How should we share? And this is for you to contemplate about, where does your audience live? Where do they live? Do they live on email? Then perhaps email. Do they live on Slack or on Teams? Then perhaps using those delivery mechanisms will help. Try sending it out via text message. Okay, so this might require you to think differently. If you had your own stream of consciousness, as it were, that people recognized, then they would be able to access it. How you share it is giving them that map, so they know that they can always go to that map. So if you do emails, maybe the subject line is always the same, right? Curated content to help you, emotional intelligence. Content to help you, negotiate sales. Content to help you, XYZ. So this way, the subject line is always the same. And so they have this map. They know where to go. You're training them where to look. So yeah, it does become about messaging, Andrew. We're going to talk about that in a second, right? So you use a combination of email, team huddles, Yammer, and central hub. You know what? And I'm all for that. The more that we can utilize the different ways of communication, the better off we are. But this is something that you do have to think out, and you do have to plan. So maybe your main point of contact is Teams, and maybe you have a team channel for curated content for different skills. Maybe you have a channel for sales skills, a channel for leadership, a channel for compliance, or what have you, right? And so all of the curated content goes there, but you use a variety of different messaging tools to get the message out and say, go to Teams, something new has been added. And maybe that's through text messaging, right? So they get a text message on their work device, or maybe it's an email. You know, it's something that's leading them to the map, right? I used to do Friday emails with 3 to 4 best articles or resources. Stopped as my supervisor didn't even read them, right? So that's because a lot of times when we send out those emails about tips and resources, those were tips and resources that we found interesting, and we thought that they would be helpful. It came from a good place, right? It comes from a good place. But the people reading it didn't find it useful, or maybe it was delivered at a bad time. Friday emails aren't necessarily the best time to send emails out, because people are starting to gear up for the weekend, or they're trying to finish out projects. So maybe it's Wednesdays at lunch. Maybe it's Thursdays first thing in the morning. So you might have to play around with timing, right? So that's something else that you might need to consider. Okay. And so then it's about thinking about knowing how the content will be effective. So you've already indicated that helpful and relevant are key. How do you know? So let me ask you now. So already I'm seeing indications of I'm not sure. But those of you who have a sense of this, how do you know? You measure access, right? So that's something. So if you're sending it out in emails, you track the downloads. Yes, Google Analytics. Thank you, Andrew. So if your emails are attached to that, feedback, right? Ask them. Ask them. So the next time you send out an article, ask them for feedback. You know, put a little one question survey there. Did you find this useful? Yes or no? Right? What about those who don't have regular digital access, frontline employees, or those who don't have email? I think that's a great question, Brenda. You know, not everybody has digital access. So that means then that if you're depending on a line of communication, so you're sending information to the managers and you're hoping that the managers are then going to send it to the frontline people, right? So that means your plan has to be communicated to the managers. Otherwise, the managers don't see the importance. So that means perhaps you're going to have to help them build their communication skills to send out the information that needs to go to the front lines. That's an entirely different hour's worth of webinar, right? About how to get managers to communicate to front lines. However, think old school. What about mailers? You have everybody's address. Send them something in the mail every now and again. Put together a postcard, put together a flyer or a letter that shares with them different pieces of information that might be helpful for them to build their careers, right? Or quarterly posters. That was something I used to do back when I worked for corporate America, is I would send out quarterly posters of links of places, websites to visit, something that could go up in the break room, right? And so while it's not as timely as you would hope it would be, the key here is timely is one thing, usefulness is another. We hope those two things meet up. Sometimes they don't, but usefulness is always going to trump it. So can you make sure that the information you're getting out to people is useful, right? Message at team meetings, text messages. So if you are set up to send text messages out to your frontline people, do that. Now there's, again, a whole nother webinar for a whole nother day. There is great uses for text messages, but there are some things that you have to keep in mind for text messages. So, but that's a way that you can also get to people. But it's about curating with purpose. And so we want to aggregate our content. We want to think about our content, and we want to be sure that it's purposeful. Because remember, finding is not the issue, filtering is. So keeping this in mind is all about how are we helping people? Do I have research on the effectiveness of short 30-second videos versus text-based? Well, there's a lot of research to go with that, and I don't have the time to get into that now. But Jamie, it's about where do people live? I'm not going to send a video to salespeople in the middle of the day because I know that they're in their cars, I know they're on planes, I know they're on trains. That doesn't make any sense. If I can send them a text message with a link for them to access, that makes sense. So think about where people live and think about their workflow. So that's my piece of advice for you. Okay, so yeah, so you work in government, you don't text, that's okay. I'm sure there are other ways to get that across. All right, so here we are, connecting content to purpose. So remember, we're connecting the content to the problem. Will the audience find content helpful? Does the content fit the audience? And will you be assessing impact? So this is part 2 of the tool that you're going to get. So part 1 walks you through assessing the content potential. Part 2 actually helps you make the decision of whether or not this is content I should actually send out. So what I've put together is a list of questions that will help you determine that. It also asks you for, do you know where this content is coming from? What's the attribution? Have you really researched the content? So a lot of times we'll stumble across a blog, but the article itself is good, but the source may be questionable. So if you go back to what the blog or where the blog is being hosted, or the person who's actually writing it, while that might be a good piece of content, that person who wrote it might be questionable, right? So those are sorts of the back research that you're going to have to do to make sure that you're sending out content that is important, that is helpful, and is not suspicious, right? So we want to be sure that we're all on the same wavelength here. So I put together this list of questions. Content is relevant to the workforce. Does it fit the audience? Are you able to assess the overall impact? And then also part of this questionnaire is when. When are you going to send it out? So it's asking you to plan. So I'm going to send this content out next Wednesday, or maybe you found 5 pieces of content about emotional intelligence that you're going to send out to high potential supervisors. So you're not going to send out all 5 at once. Maybe you want to send one out every Monday or every other day. What's your plan for sending out this curated content? Okay, so that's part of the questions that I'm asking you here about being sure that you're connecting the content to the purpose. Okay, so now the third part is our communication plan. So our communication plan works you through making sure that people know that your curated content is out there, right? And keep communication short and sweet. Nobody likes anything long. We all know that people are not going to read past the first couple of sentences, and they may only read the bullet points. So we know now that our communication efforts need to be short and sweet. So here's the description of the content. When you send out your curated content, you want to start out by telling them how long the content is, the expectation of the effort, and what type of content it is. So for example, you're going to say, this emotional intelligence article will take you 2 minutes to read, or this emotional intelligence video is 3 minutes and 30 seconds long, right? So you want to set it up so people know what to expect. It's like, oh, I'm having a cup of coffee right now. I can read that. I can watch that. And then you're going to say, this emotional intelligence video is 3 minutes and 30 seconds long. Please watch. And after you've watched, take down one key idea that you can use with your team member today. And again, you're going to say that it's a video or a blog post or a list or a checklist or a worksheet, right? So that's all very short and very concise and very sweet. This way people know what they're getting into. A lot of times what we do is, whether we're on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, we see an article, and let me see if you guys have ever done this. So you see an article that you like, let's say on Twitter, and then you retweet it and you say, this is a great article, and then you send it away, or this is a fabulous read, or I love everything here. You know, how many of us have done this? And you do it on LinkedIn as well. I know I've been bad at that. Enid, guilty. She's like, I've done that. Yep. Manuel, daily. Okay. You know what? And that's great. I'm glad you're sharing. So that's the good news. I'm glad you're sharing. The key here is, I'm going to challenge you. So here's your action today. Today and every day afterwards. Share something on LinkedIn, share something on Twitter, but write at least one reason why somebody should read it, or one reason why somebody should watch the video or listen to the podcast. Give them one good, purposeful reason as to why they should do it. That's my challenge to you. Okay. So when you're thinking about your description of content, that's exactly what needs to go in that communication piece. Don't just give them a list of things to read. Tell them why, and why it's important, and why it's relevant, and why it's helpful. And when you do that, you're going to see readership of your posts or of your curation efforts go up. Okay, so that is part of your communication piece. So now here's a little exercise that I'd like you to think about. Whoops, here. Part of this also is creating a human-centered explanation. A lot of times as L&D people, we get into the habit of writing things as learning objectives. even in regular life. We write them as learning objectives. So now what I'd like you to think about is a human-centered explanation. So for example here, you might have an article about productivity, and you may include, a little communication piece, and you're going to say, click here to read this article about improving productivity. So now how could we make that sentence more human-centered? You can want to improve your productivity, click here, okay? Button to click on. Think deeper, people. How can we make it more human-centered? Start with a question, okay? All right. Oh, Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Start with a question. Yes, like what? How can you be more productive? Right, now we're talking to them, right? So now we're starting to bring in the human element. Tell how it helped you tomorrow. I like that. Yes. Have you ever wanted to improve your productivity? Yes. Yes, that's it. Okay, now you guys are getting it. Now you're getting it. So now, oh, wait, what was that? It passed me by. Do you need to get more done in your day? Yes. Create a newspaper headline, Antonio. Yes. Become more productive and get that promotion. Oh, I love that one. So yes. Tired of procrastinating. This article can show you how to get past that. Thank you. Thank you. Now we're thinking more human. We're thinking less learning. We're thinking more human. And those sorts of prefaces will bring people in, because yeah, I am tired of procrastinating, and this is a barrier for me in my work, and I really need to get past this. Okay, I can do that. And so now we're thinking about bringing the human into, clickbaity. You know why it's clickbaity? Because people click on it. That's why it's called clickbaity. Now, it's clickbaity if it's false. If you are giving them a title that is not true, 100 ways to get a raise tomorrow, that's clickbaity and it's not true. So I don't have a problem with clickbaity if it's true. If it builds enthusiasm, if it's actually answering the question that you have stated that it will answer, there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, so think about, I want them to click. That's the purpose. You want them to click. You want them to not only click, but read. So give them something to hang their hat on. And that is where you will find that your curation efforts then become stronger. Okay, so now we're talking about getting the tools out. So what tool are you going to use? This is the last part of your curation thought process. What tool are you going to use? When are you going to send it out? How can I get greater appeal? How can I get greater reach? These are all things that you've got to think about. And perhaps these are not necessarily questions for each time you send a message. Maybe these are questions that you ask as part of your curation overall strategy, right? So these are the tools that I like to use, or these are the tools that are part of the culture of our organization, like Slack or Teams. This is part of the culture. So now, how can I use that tool to get greater reach? And that's part of your curation strategy. The when becomes super important, as I've already explained, that Fridays is not the best time to send this type of information out. It really isn't. So outside of Fridays, and Mondays are not good either. So that leaves you at Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So when on Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays are the best time. So that's something that you've got to do your research on, because every organization is going to be different. So if you want real information to get out, then think about that when. Okay. All right. So What do you think is going to be your greatest challenge? So now, let me get, oh, I have not. Let's go back. Here we go. Let's go back to Menti here. Let's talk about what you think based on everything that we've discussed today. What do you think is going to be your greatest challenge? And so you're going back to Menti. You might have to refresh your screen, but code 41511692. What do you think is going to be your greatest challenge? And then I will answer, while you're doing that, I'm going to answer the questions that are in the Q&A here. Do you need to ask permission to use other people's content? Where is the line drawn? That's a really good question. No, you don't necessarily have to ask permission, but you should use, attribute. So whenever you use information, so let's say you're just sending a link out, you don't necessarily have to give an attribution, but it would be nice. So in your messaging, you could say this article was written by XYZ. Now, if you're using part of that article, blog post, or research within a white paper or within a presentation, then you do need to attribute that. If you're using a research paper as a whole, and the research paper itself says that you have to ask permission, then you have to ask permission. But a lot of times there are subscriptions that you can get to research papers that you pay one fee for, and you can have access to all of their research without asking permission, but just for attribution. Okay. How do you create human-centered prefaces that are less clickbaity? So that, I think I answered that question. You use the language that is familiar to your organization. So you know the culture of your business. Use language that mirrors the culture of your business. But I would also say, don't make it so that it is vanilla within the culture of your organization. So that way people just scroll by it and they don't notice it. Level it up a little bit. You don't have to go way far out, but level it up so that it's noticed. Okay. How do you overcome company culture barriers, resistance to collaboration? Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on that, Cindy, although this is not a collaboration webinar. But what I find is that if you, in your curation efforts, if you focus on user-generated content, the more you focus on user-generated content, the more likely people will be to collaborate, because they realize that there are other people out there who have knowledge. And if you say, Cindy sent this great checklist for safety, here it is. You're going to send it out to everybody. And if you have questions, contact me and I'll get a hold of Cindy, or maybe Cindy says you can have them contact me directly. But now we've got Cindy's name out there as perhaps a subject matter expert or somebody who's willing to share information. And then somebody down the line says, hey, I have a checklist too. I want to share that too. And then they're going to get in touch with you and say, can you share my checklist? Sure. And so those little baby steps help to encourage the overall collaboration of your organization. Okay, so let's see what we've got here as far as challenges. Helping retrieve the information, right? So it's creating that roadmap. And perhaps some of you may have to go all the way back to step one and think about, what is going to be my roadmap? What does that look like? And you have to send out a communication piece, perhaps, that says, we are building this, we're building this space that's going to host resources. And every Monday morning, I'm going to be sending you something, and keep your eyeballs out for it. And so you're creating this map for them. So you may have to start all the way back at the beginning, because right now they're used to getting information from you that is scattershot, so it's not consistent. They don't know when it's coming or how it's coming. So you may have to back it up and start all the way back at the beginning and think about your overall curation strategy. Yeah, finding and sifting through content. We're going to talk about tools here in just one second. So if there are cultural biases, unconscious bias, for example, leaders always tend to gravitate back, to top-down modality, and that's something, again, that takes baby steps. So when you think about biases, such as, unconscious biases, I already know this, I don't need to read this. And this is why that communication piece becomes super important, because now you're giving them the reason why. You're giving them the helpful piece. Or maybe if you know your audience, right? So you're sending this to senior leadership. Let's say senior leadership gets this piece of information. You pull out a piece of that article or a piece of that research and pop that into your communication piece. Now you've hooked them. They're like, oh, wait, 41% of people spend 41% of the time finding stuff. Wait, where did that come from? I need to read more about that. So that's the communication piece that goes out, that hooks them in, that maybe helps break away from some of those biases. But this is why knowing your audience and really segmenting where you're sending your content to becomes something critical, right? That becomes a critical part of your overall curation strategy. Okay. So I'm seeing all of these challenges: time, user adoption, getting them to read the emails, using the team channels, right? Lack of supervisor support or enthusiasm. And a lot of times what this means is that you need a champion. You need a champion. So get a supervisor who's a champion. Get somebody who's always on Teams or Slack to be a champion for you. Someone who is saying, you know what, if you aren't reading the emails that Karen sends out, then you're missing the boat, right? You need to get those people out there who are going to talk about the content, not about you, but about the content. And then everybody else becomes interested. It's baby steps, right? It's baby steps. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I see that we are almost at the top of our hour here. And I want to get back here. Hopefully you see my screen again. Let me know in the chat if you're looking at the wrong panel. But here are some of the tools. Yes, I'll share the information that came out of the Mentee. I'll send it over to the Guild and they can forward that out to you. Here are some of the tools that are commonly used: Pocket, Digo, Flipboard, Slack, Teams, Feedly. Those are all automated aggregation tools that you can use, easy to use. These were the ones that I put up that are the most common, that are super easy to use. So when you're just starting your curation aggregation efforts, Pocket or Feedly, those are the top ones that I suggest you go to. Digo is a great bookmarking tool. So these are some tools for you to look into. So you can take a screenshot of this page, and you can go off and do your own research and find the tool that works best for you. So here's my last piece of advice before we head on out, before the top of the hour. Just be sure that your curation is a deliberate search. Make it a practice. And what I mean by a deliberate search is, a lot of times we end up falling down a rabbit hole in the internet. You start looking about leadership, and the next thing you know, you're looking at baby goat videos. Try to make sure that when you're looking for leadership articles, know what problem you're trying to solve. Don't just go off looking for leadership development or emotional intelligence. What specific problem are you trying to solve? Find articles that fit that. So make deliberate search a practice. And that means taking interest beyond what is happening right now. That means think about in the future. What pain points do you see in the future, and start your curation efforts about that. Okay, so now think about in the chat for me before we go, what is the one thing you're going to do based upon our conversation? What's the one thing you're going to do? And Sandra, I do have tools, and I can send that over to Karen too. I do have a tool list. Okay, so exploring the tools, Guy, you're going to explore tools. Excellent. What is the one thing in the chat? Stop bookmarking, start sharing. Reorganize your tools. Be sure you include the why, include the how, add the human. Think twice before sharing. Make a plan. Consistency, deliberation, curation strategy, focus, defining your content, planned sharing, focused emails. Love it. Yes, a call to action. Excellent, excellent. Well done, everyone. Well done. Yeah, the call to action and the why becomes something really important to what you are doing. Really important to what you're doing. So now please connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to do that. And if you want the tools list, I have a tools list. Just connect with me on LinkedIn and just ask me for it and I'll send it over to you. And I'm happy to share my information with you. So again, here's all of my information: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can shoot me an email. I'm okay with that. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to send over anything that I have to help you with your curation efforts. So thank you, everybody. This was a really fun session, and I appreciate everybody's input.
Thank you, Shannon. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but we've reached past our time. So I just want to thank you for that great session. And like Shannon said, she does have a curation tool, and that will be posted after this webinar. I do want to thank not only Shannon, but Go1, who sponsored this webinar. And of course, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to share this with us. So thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.